The message arrived on every screen across Earth simultaneously: phones, computers, billboards, and even old tube TVs that hadn't worked in decades suddenly flickered to life. The aliens didn't bother with diplomatic channels or government contacts. They went straight to the people with their unprecedented declaration. By intergalactic law, all eligible Earthlings must take 2 alien spouses within the next solar revolution or face permanent quarantine from the galactic community. I remember exactly where I was when it happened, trying to fix the ancient coffee maker at Joe's Diner where I worked the morning shift. The entire place went dead silent as everyone stared at their phones or the TV above the counter. Even old Mr. Peterson, who came in every morning at 6 a.m. sharp for his black coffee and wheat toast, forgot about his breakfast entirely. The Galactic Union, as they called themselves, explained that our species had reached a critical development threshold. We weren't being invaded or conquered. We were being integrated. According to them, genetic diversity through interspecies marriage was the foundation of their civilization, preventing wars and fostering cooperation across the cosmos. Earth could either join their society by participating in this tradition or remain forever isolated. What they didn't mention in their grand announcement was how exactly this was supposed to work. I mean, there are over 8 billion people on Earth. Where were they planning to find 16 billion aliens willing to marry us? And more importantly, what did these aliens even look like? The message came with no visuals, no images of our potential future spouses. The next few days were chaos. Religious leaders called emergency meetings. Politicians made inflammatory speeches. Scientists tried desperately to establish communication channels with our new galactic neighbors. Social media exploded with memes and conspiracy theories. Dating apps rushed to add alien preference settings to their platforms. But the aliens remained silent. No more messages, no clarification, no response to our countless attempts at contact. Just that one broadcast and then nothing. The countdown timer they left behind kept ticking away, marking the days until our deadline to comply. That's when the dream started. Every night, more and more people reported having vivid visions of strange beings and distant worlds. They'd wake up knowing things they couldn't possibly know: alien languages, customs, histories. Some claimed they were being prepared, educated for what was to come. Others insisted it was mass hysteria, our collective anxiety manifesting in shared delusions. I hadn't had any dreams yet, but I could feel something changing. The air felt different somehow, charged with possibility and potential. The stars seemed brighter at night, as if they were watching us more closely. And sometimes, when I was alone in the diner during those quiet pre-dawn hours, I could swear I heard whispers in languages that shouldn't exist. Then yesterday, exactly 1 month after the initial announcement, I found the invitation. It was sitting on my doorstep in an iridescent envelope that seemed to shift colors as I moved it. The paper inside was covered in symbols that rearranged themselves into English as I watched. "Your presence is requested," it read, "at the first Galactic Union matchmaking event." As I stand here now, staring at my reflection in the mirror and trying to decide what one wears to meet their potential alien spouses, I can't help but wonder, how did we go from flipping burgers and worrying about rent to contemplating marriage with beings from other worlds? And more importantly, what happens to those who refuse? The invitation sits on my dresser, the time and date glowing softly in the dark. Tomorrow at sunset, in the middle of Central Park. No RSVP required. Just show up if you're ready to become part of something bigger than humanity has ever dreamed of. Or stay home and accept that Earth might remain alone in the cosmos forever. I've already decided I'm going. Someone has to take the first step, right? Besides, I've always wanted an interesting life story to tell. Though I have to admit, how I met your alien parents wasn't exactly what I had in mind. The morning before the matchmaking event passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I must have changed clothes 20 times before settling on simple dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt. What's the dress code for meeting potential alien spouses anyway? At least I wasn't alone in my uncertainty. Social media was flooded with people asking the same questions. My hands trembled as I locked up my apartment. The streets were eerily quiet for New York, with only a fraction of the usual traffic. It seemed like everyone was either heading to Central Park or deliberately staying as far away from it as possible. No middle ground today. As I walked, I noticed small groups of people heading in the same direction, all with that same mix of terror and excitement on their faces. Some clutched their invitations like lifelines. Others tried to act casual, as if they were just out for an evening stroll. A few wore their finest clothes, wedding dresses, tuxedos, traditional outfits from various cultures. I felt a bit underdressed in comparison. The closer I got to the park, the more my invitation pulsed with a soft, warm light. The symbols on it had changed again, now showing a map with a glowing dot that I assumed was my destination. Other invitation holders were checking their maps too, all of us being guided to different locations throughout the park's sprawling grounds. That's when I noticed something strange. The park looked different. The trees seemed taller, their leaves shimmering with colors that didn't quite belong in our spectrum. The grass beneath my feet felt somehow more alive, responding to each step with tiny pulses of bioluminescence. The air itself had changed, carrying scents that reminded me of places I'd never been. My map led me to a quiet corner near the reservoir. As I approached, the air began to ripple like heat waves rising from hot pavement. A soft chime sounded from my invitation, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. They appeared without warning or flashy special effects, just there as if they had always been standing in that spot and I was only now able to see them. Two beings, so different from each other that it took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. The first one was tall and willowy, with skin that looked like liquid moonlight. Multiple arms, I counted 6, moved with impossible grace as they adjusted what appeared to be some kind of ceremonial robe. Their face was both familiar and alien, with features that seemed to shift slightly every time I blinked. The second being was shorter than me but broader, with what looked like iridescent scales or plates covering their body. Their eyes, all 4 of them, glowed with a warm amber light that somehow felt comforting. When they moved, I heard a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, potential spouse," the taller one spoke, their voice resonating in my mind rather than my ears. "We have reviewed your genetic profile, personality matrix, and potential compatibility factors. You show promising adaptability traits." The shorter being made a series of musical tones that transformed into words in my consciousness. "Your species has such interesting emotional patterns. So much fear mixed with curiosity. It makes you uniquely suited for integration." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. What do you say in a situation like this? "Nice to meet you" seemed inadequate. "Come here often" was definitely out. Before I could figure it out, the taller being raised 2 of their hands in a graceful gesture. "We understand this is overwhelming. The integration process requires careful preparation. Today is merely an introduction, a chance to begin understanding each other. We have much to share about our cultures, our worlds, and the true reason behind this universal law of marriage." My heart skipped a beat at those words. The true reason. So there was more to this than just genetic diversity and galactic peace. The shorter being must have sensed my spike of curiosity because they made a sound that I somehow knew was laughter. "Yes, there is much more. Truths about your world, your species, and your place in the greater cosmos that will challenge everything you believe. But first, we must establish trust, connection, understanding." They began to tell me about their worlds, their lives, their societies. With each word, images formed in my mind. Crystal cities floating in purple skies, ocean worlds where thoughts were shared through bioluminescent patterns, desert planets where time itself moved differently. It was beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely fascinating. But as they spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were carefully avoiding certain topics. When I asked about other humans who had received invitations, they changed the subject. When I mentioned the dreams people had been having, they exchanged what might have been meaningful glances. The sun was setting when they finally fell silent. The taller being produced what looked like 2 small crystals, offering them to me with 4 of their hands. "These are communication devices. If you accept this initial meeting as successful, they will allow us to continue our conversations and begin the formal courtship process." The shorter being added, "You have 3 Earth days to decide. Place the crystals in water if you wish to proceed. Break them if you do not. But know that this choice, like all choices, has consequences beyond what you can currently comprehend. Before I could ask what they meant by consequences, they vanished just as suddenly as they had appeared. The air returned to normal. The grass stopped glowing, and I was left standing alone with 2 alien crystals and about 1,000,000 questions. As I walked home through the darkening park, I saw other humans emerging from their own meetings. Some were crying, some laughing, some looked shell-shocked. A few were already wearing similar crystals as jewelry. Others were throwing their crystals into trash bins or breaking them on the spot. I kept mine clutched tightly in my pocket, feeling their slight warmth against my palm. 3 days to decide whether to take the first step toward marrying 2 aliens and potentially discovering some grand cosmic truth, or refuse and maybe doom humanity to isolation forever. No pressure, right? The dream started that night, but unlike the vague visions others had reported, mine were sharp and clear. I saw myself standing in those crystal cities, walking through those impossible oceans, living a life I could barely imagine, and somewhere in those dreams, I caught glimpses of something else, something that made me wonder if this whole marriage law wasn't about marriage at all. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I barely slept, and when I did, the dreams became more intense. I saw vast libraries containing the history of countless civilizations, witnessed ceremonies that defied the laws of physics, and caught fleeting glimpses of beings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. But most disturbing were the moments when the dreams shifted into something darker, images of empty worlds, silent cities, and strange devices that made my head hurt just looking at them. I kept the crystals on my bedside table, watching them pulse softly in sync with my heartbeat. Sometimes, when the room was completely quiet, I could swear I heard them whispering in languages that shouldn't exist in our universe. The longer I waited, the warmer they grew, until they felt almost alive in my hands. On the morning of the 3rd day, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Reports were coming in from around the world about the results of the matchmaking events. Some people had already completed their initial bonding ceremonies, proudly displaying their alien spouses on social media. Others had publicly destroyed their crystals in protest, calling the whole thing a trap or an invasion by other means. But what caught my attention were the disappearances. People who had accepted the crystals were vanishing, not all at once, but gradually, quietly. Their social media would go dark, their phones would stop working, and their families would file missing persons reports. The authorities seemed powerless to investigate, as if the disappeared had simply ceased to exist in our reality. I was still reading the news when my TV turned itself on. The screen showed only static at first, then resolved into a familiar face, or rather, the shifting, ethereal features of my taller potential spouse. Their voice echoed in my mind rather than coming from the speakers. Time grows short, they said, their multiple arms moving in complex patterns that made my eyes water. We sense your hesitation, your fear, but there are greater fears to consider. The truth must be shared before it's too late. The shorter being appeared beside them, their amber eyes more urgent than before. Your world stands at a crossroads. The marriage law is but a shell, a container for something far more vital. Those who have joined us have begun to understand. Those who refuse, they trailed off, making a sound like breaking glass. My hands shook as I reached for the crystals. They were burning hot now, almost too painful to touch. What aren't you telling me? What happens to the people who disappear? They haven't disappeared, the taller being said. They've begun to see, to understand. As you must, if your world is to survive what's coming. The TV screen flickered, showing images that made my heart stop. Massive shapes moving in the spaces between stars, ancient machines buried beneath Earth's oceans, hidden doorways in the fabric of reality itself. And behind it all, a sense of something approaching, something that made both my alien suitors radiate waves of fear. The marriage law was never about marriage, the shorter being said softly. It was about preparation, protection. Your species has a unique capability, one that could save not just your world, but all worlds. But it requires a complete neural and genetic bond with our kinds to activate this potential. And if we refuse, I whispered, already suspecting the answer. The taller being's features settled into an expression of deep sadness. Then you will face what comes alone, as so many worlds did before they fell into silence. The screen went dark, leaving me alone with the burning crystals and a choice that suddenly felt much bigger than just marriage. Outside my window, I could see other people's TVs flickering with similar messages. The air felt heavy with decision, with destiny. I filled a bowl with water and held the crystals above it, watching their reflection ripple and distort. In their depths, I saw flashes of possible futures, some beautiful beyond imagination, others too terrible to contemplate. My hands shook as I opened my fingers, letting the crystals hover just above the water's surface. All across the city, I could hear people shouting, crying, arguing about their own choices. Emergency vehicles wailed in the distance. Military helicopters thundered overhead, and underneath it all, a deep vibration began to build, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what humanity would choose. The crystals pulsed once, twice, 3 times in perfect sync with my heartbeat. In their light, I saw shadows moving across the moon, massive shapes that shouldn't be there, couldn't be there. And in that moment, I understood that whatever I decided wouldn't just affect me, or even just humanity. This choice would ripple across the cosmos itself. Time seemed to slow as the crystals slipped from my fingers, falling toward the water below. In that endless moment, all the dreams and visions crashed together in my mind, revealing a pattern I hadn't seen before. The true purpose of the marriage law, the real reason for the disappearances, the nature of what was coming. And I finally understood why our alien suitors looked so afraid. The crystals never reached the water. Just before they touched the surface, they froze in midair, suspended in a beam of light that shouldn't have been possible in my darkened apartment. Around them, reality itself seemed to bend and twist, creating a window into somewhere, or something else. Through this impossible window, I saw them. Not my alien suitors, but the others, the ones they were afraid of. They existed in angles that hurt to look at, moving in ways that made my mind scream in protest. These weren't aliens in any sense we could understand. They were something older, something that existed before our universe had rules. My phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly knocked over the bowl of water. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. The voice on the other end was human and somehow familiar. "Don't put those crystals in water," she said urgently. "Whatever you do, don't accept their offer. It's not what they're telling us." "Who is this?" I demanded, watching as the crystals continued to hover, casting strange shadows on my walls. "Someone who said yes 3 days ago. Someone who saw what really happens." She paused, her breath shaky. "The marriages aren't about genetic diversity or protection. They're about creating anchors. The 2 aliens aren't choosing us. They're choosing points in space-time to lock down reality itself." Before I could process this, my TV crackled to life again. But instead of my alien suitors, I saw a scene playing out in what looked like Times Square. The massive screens usually displaying advertisements were showing the same thing. Thousands of humans standing in perfect geometric patterns, each holding crystals similar to mine. Above them, the sky had changed. It was folding in on itself, creating patterns that seemed to repeat infinitely. "They're trying to stabilize our dimension," the woman on the phone continued. "The things out there, the ones between spaces, they feed on chaos, on possibility. Every human who accepts the marriage proposal becomes a fixed point, unchangeable, unmoving. We're not getting married to aliens. We're becoming living locks on the doors of reality. The crystals pulse faster now, their light taking on an urgent quality. Outside, I could hear a low humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The woman's voice grew more desperate. But here's what they're not telling us. For every point they fix in place, another has to become completely chaotic to maintain the universal balance. For every human who becomes an anchor, another becomes something else, something free, too free." That's when I remembered where I'd heard her voice before. She was the morning news anchor who had disappeared last week, the one who had proudly displayed her crystals on live television before vanishing mid-broadcast. "What happened to you?" I whispered. I became the chaos to someone else's order, and I saw what they're really building. Not a defense against those things out there, but a prison. A cage made of fixed points in space and time, with Earth at its center. We're not being saved. We're being turned into a trap. The humming outside grew louder, and my windows began to vibrate. In Times Square, the geometric patterns of humans were beginning to glow, each person a point of light in an increasingly complex lattice. But in the spaces between them, I could see others moving, shadowy figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. My alien suitors appeared in my apartment without warning, their forms less stable than before, crackling with energy. "You must choose now," the taller one said, their voice urgent. "The barriers are failing. The spaces between spaces are breaking down." "You lied to us," I said, backing away from them. "This isn't about marriage or protection. You're using us." The shorter being made a sound like shattering crystal. "No, we're saving you. Saving everything. Yes, some must be sacrificed to chaos, but the alternative is total entropy, the end of all structured reality. Those things out there," the taller one gestured to the window, where impossible shapes were now clearly visible against the night sky. "They aren't destroying worlds. They're unmaking them, turning ordered space back into pure possibility. Every civilization before yours tried to fight them directly. All failed. But your species, your minds can hold paradox in ways ours cannot. You can be both fixed and fluid, ordered and chaotic." The woman on the phone spoke again. "Don't listen. They're not telling you the whole truth about what happens to the ones who become chaos points. We don't just balance the anchors. We become something new, something that might actually have a chance against those things. But the aliens are too afraid of chaos to see it." The crystals spun faster in their beam of light, and I felt reality holding its breath. Outside, the lattice of human anchors was nearly complete, but the shadows between them were growing stronger, taking on forms that seemed almost human. I finally understood the real choice I was facing. It wasn't between order and chaos, between saving Earth or letting it fall. It was about which truth to believe, the one that promised safety through stability, or the one that suggested our only hope lay in becoming something completely new. The crystals pulsed one final time, waiting for my decision, and in that moment I saw a third option that neither side had considered. I reached out and grasped both crystals, one in each hand. The woman on the phone gasped, and my alien suitors moved forward in alarm. But instead of putting them in water or breaking them, I brought them together, touching their points to each other. "What are you doing?" The taller alien's voice resonated with fear. "The crystals cannot touch. The energies will." A pulse of pure white light filled my apartment. When it faded, I wasn't alone anymore. But it wasn't just my two alien suitors there with me. The news anchor who'd called was suddenly present in the flesh, along with dozens of others. Both the anchored humans from Times Square and the shadow figures from between spaces had appeared in my small living room, as if my apartment had become a meeting point between order and chaos. "The crystals were never meant to be separate," I said, understanding flowing through me as the energies connected. "You divided them because you were afraid of what would happen if order and chaos existed in the same space. But that's exactly what makes humans different, isn't it? We already contain both." The crystals melted together in my hands, forming a single clear stone that pulsed with both light and shadow. In its depth, I could see the truth, not just about the marriage law or the things between spaces, but about reality itself. Every species before us tried to fight the entropy beings by becoming purely ordered. I continued, watching understanding dawn on both human and alien faces. And when that failed, you thought the answer was to create a balance between order and chaos, sacrificing some humans to each side. But you didn't realize we're not meant to be one or the other. We're meant to be both at once. The impossible shapes in the sky were gathering now, drawn to the power of the combined crystals. But instead of feeling afraid, I felt something like recognition. They weren't our enemies. They were the universe's immune system, breaking down realities that had become too rigid, too fixed in their ways. The news anchor stepped forward, her form flickering between solid and shadow. "Of course," she whispered, That's why some of us could survive becoming chaos points. We never fully left our ordered selves behind. The taller aliens' form stabilized, their features settling into something almost human. Your species. You can hold contradiction in your very beings. You can believe two opposing things at once, can be both particle and wave, can dream of infinity while living infinite forms. We don't need to marry two aliens, I said, holding up the combined crystal. We need to marry the two sides of ourselves, the part that craves order and the part that dances with chaos. That's what makes us the perfect bridge. The crystal flared again, and suddenly every human on Earth could see the truth. The geometric lattice of anchors dissolved as people awakened to their full potential. The shadow figures merged back with their ordered counterparts, and the beings between spaces, they began to change. They're not destroying our reality, the shorter aliens said in awe. They're evolving it. And you're showing them how. The crystal in my hands pulsed one final time, and I felt reality shift, not breaking or becoming fixed, but transforming into something new. Something that could contain both order and chaos, structure and possibility. The marriage law had never been about finding alien spouses. It had been about humanity finally growing up enough to marry its own contradictions. The beings between spaces took on forms we could finally comprehend. They looked like abstract artists painting new universes into being. They hadn't been trying to unmake reality. They'd been trying to help it grow beyond simple binary choices. As the sun rose over a changed Earth, I looked at my alien suitors. So, I said with a smile, I guess the wedding's off. The taller one made a sound like chimes in the wind. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's just beginning in a way none of us expected. After all, your species still has much to teach us about embracing contradiction. The news anchor laughed, her form now perfectly balanced between light and shadow. And I thought morning television was weird. Above us, the sky had become something new, neither purely ordered nor chaotic, but a beautiful dance between possibilities and patterns. Humanity hadn't just survived its first contact with higher dimensional beings. We'd shown them a new way to exist. As I watched humans around the world awakening to their full potential, I couldn't help but laugh at how it all started, with a simple marriage law that turned out to be the universe's most elaborate matchmaking service, not for couples, but for the fundamental forces of reality itself. The crystal hummed in my hands, reminding me that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. We still had so much to learn, so much to explore, but now we could do it as our full selves, neither purely ordered nor chaotic, but wonderfully, perfectly human. And somewhere in the spaces between spaces, the artists of entropy continued their work, no longer breaking down realities, but helping them evolve, one paradox at a time. 1 year later, I still keep the combined crystal on my desk at the diner. Yes, I went back to work there. Someone's got to serve coffee to both humans and our new interdimensional friends. You haven't lived until you've seen a being of pure energy try to figure out how to drink a cappuccino. The Galactic Union officially declared Earth's marriage integration a success, though not in the way they'd originally planned. Instead of becoming a fortress of fixed points against chaos, we became a teaching center for other species learning to embrace their own contradictions. Turns out humans aren't the only ones who needed to marry their opposing natures. We're just the ones who figured it out first. My alien suitors stayed on Earth, but not as spouses. They became cultural ambassadors, helping bridge the gap between traditional ordered societies and the artists of entropy. Last week, they both came into the diner for breakfast. The taller one has gotten really fond of blueberry pancakes, while the shorter one just likes to make the syrup dance in impossible patterns above the plate. The news anchor, her name is Sarah, by the way, started a new kind of broadcasting network. Her shows exist simultaneously in multiple states of reality, helping people understand the new way of seeing the universe. She jokes that her ratings are quantum entangled with her coffee consumption, which might explain why she's my best customer. The changes weren't always easy. Some people struggled with their new awareness of reality's fluid nature, but humans are adaptable. We learn to surf the waves of possibility like we were born to it. Kids these days grow up learning both mathematics and possibility shaping, their homework existing in multiple states until observed. Central Park became a popular spot for interdimensional gatherings. The trees that remember their role in the first contact and sometimes share their memories in displays of light and shadow. The spot where I first met my would-be alien spouses has become a small garden where reality is particularly flexible. Couples, human, alien, and everything in between, often visit to remember how a simple marriage law changed the universe. As for the beings between spaces, they still move through the cosmos, but now they leave beauty in their wake instead of emptiness. They're artists, after all, and Earth taught them that the best art comes from embracing both structure and chaos. Sometimes, on quiet nights, you can see their works in progress painted across the sky, new forms of reality blooming like flowers in impossible colors. The crystal on my desk pulses softly as I write this, reminding me that every moment is both an ending and a beginning, both a particle and a wave, both a story and a truth. Yesterday, a young kid having breakfast with their parents pointed at it and asked what it was. "It's a wedding ring," I said, "for a marriage that married everything to everything else." The kid seemed to understand perfectly, which didn't surprise me at all. After all, children have always been better at accepting contradictions than adults. Sometimes people ask if I regret not going through with the original marriage plan. I just smile and tell them I did get married, not to two aliens, but to the beautiful contradiction that is being human. We all did. And somehow, that turned out to be exactly what the universe needed. The morning rush is starting at the diner now. I can hear the happy chaos of human voices mixing with alien harmonics, of coffee cups clinking against surfaces that might or might not fully exist, of life continuing in all its wonderful impossibility. And as I pin on my name tag and grab my order pad, I can't help but smile at how it all worked out. After all, what's marriage but learning to love something different from yourself? And what's humanity but the endless dance between order and chaos, forever becoming something new? The crystal pulses one more time, casting patterns of light and shadow across the menu. Another day begins in our brave new universe, and somewhere out there, the artists of entropy are still painting reality into ever-evolving forms, while we humans do what we've always done best: embrace the contradiction, serve the coffee, and keep falling in love with the impossible.